Welcome to Therapists Uncensored, a podcast where therapists freely speak their minds about real life matters.
Welcome back to Therapists Uncensored. This is episode 18, where we're going to talk about how communicating with our loved ones can feel so charged and dangerous at times. Using the Polyvagal theory, we'll discuss why we have extreme reactions to those we love, even when we don't want to. I'm Ann Kelly.
I'm Patty Allwell.
And I'm Sue Marriott. And we are happy that you have either rejoined us or found us, because we're going to be talking about something that we actually haven't covered at all yet on the podcast. It's going to be a new subject about the brain and figuring out why we do the really dumb things that we do sometimes, which is kind of our specialty, isn't it?
Doing the dumb things or talking about them, or both, I guess.
I think my specialty is probably doing them. So the book, let's just start with that, and who that we're going to be covering is, he's a researcher and a clinician, and his name is Stephen Porges. And the book title...
It's a mouthful. It's the Polyvagal theory, the foundation of emotions, attachment, communication, and self-regulation.
Well, I thought I would start with a very embarrassing example. Is that going to be okay?
Sure.
Let's do it.
We'd be delighted to hear your example.
Exactly. You'd be delighted for me to humiliate myself. But speaking of humiliating myself, actually, let me give an update for our listeners that we are super excited about that we are watching this podcast grow. We're new and we can't believe it, but we are spreading around the world. And I wanted to do a quick shout out to our listeners internationally in particular. And we've got all these people listening.
We're now up to 71 countries.
That's right. And we're all over the United States. So we really want to know that we're thinking of you and we're giving you a big shout out and a big wave. And we hope that you communicate with us and tell us what you think and any ideas you have. And so hello and welcome. I say that as I give my embarrassing example, as I realize that the world is listening. But the reason I'm willing to offer it is because I don't think I'm alone. And that is that, by day, I am a professional and a successful therapist and happily married and, have kids thriving. I appear to be an ordinary person, mildly successful, I would say. However, at a drop of a hat, I can lose my mind. I can get triggered, and I think of it as turtling up. What that looks like is I have trouble making eye contact. I kind of go mute. I don't understand what's going on. I feel like almost feedling up. You know what I mean? I will really withdraw, and efforts to reach me feel invasive or intrusive. To me, it's very obvious what's going on and what needs to happen, but apparently it's not that obvious to everybody else.
Right.
Because everybody gets it wrong.
They pick up your shell and start throwing it against the wall.
That's right. Everybody's tapping on it. And so I use that as an example. Like, I want to understand what the heck is going on. And there's this new research. It's relatively new. And again, it's different than what we've talked about before with Siegel and with interpersonal neurobiology. And it's called polyvagal theory. So does anybody want to pick up from there? And we'll kind of keep digging into this. It's it's a more advanced, or it's a more detailed kind of digging in a little deeper than what we've done before.
Right. And I think it's basically talking about how our nervous system can react to safety or lack of safety.
Yeah. So why do I turtle up, Patty?
You turtle up because you think that the situation is unsafe and you can't figure out how to get away, so you go in.
Right. That's exactly right. So what Dr. Porges has, through a lot of research, and he actually does a lot of work with autism, he has basically thrown out this theory, not thrown it out, but really refined it, that the nervous system has basically, from an evolutionary standpoint, going from reptilian to mammal. And he does actually talk about turtles. So it's not an accident that I think of it that way. And that probably some of you listening might relate to some of this. That basically there's kind of three different systems in our body. And that the three different systems are designed to adapt to three different things. And the three different things are safety. That there's a safety system, and there's a threat system, and there is a danger system.
All the systems are there to keep us engaged in the world in the safest way. I mean, what we're talking about is survival, and our bodies are intricately developed to have three systems to be able to help us engage in the world and protect us when there's threat and danger.
That's right. And they're evolutionarily stacked on top of each other. What's unique about this is that the way we've talked about it before is almost more of like that it's chunked, like that it's one thing. And this, we're beginning now to differentiate it, that it's actually three separate systems that can get activated. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through those different systems. And I want you, as you're listening, to really think about, because you have this inside you. And so I want you to think about how you relate and what it looks like for you when you're in any of these three systems. So where do we want to begin?
Well, one of the things you had said for the listeners is that we generally divide it into two things and we're adding a third. So I was just going to clarify what I think you mean by the two things. We talk about quite a bit about how to feel safe and open, and that when we feel threatened or we think there's danger, we go into more of a fight or flight mode. And I think that for the listeners, that's a pretty familiar thing. You know, you either feel safe, or if you feel threatened, you go into this activation and you're ready to snarl at somebody or run from them. And that's our survival. And I think that's how we've talked about and conceptualized it for so many years. And that what Stephen Porges is really adding in this third part is what we're going to speak about.
Right.
We're going to add to it.
Right. Well, and I would say it just a little bit differently, which is, yes.
Well, and develop the safety part
exactly
in a much more complex way, instead of you're safe or you're threatened, but the safety and what that safety is about in the social engagement.
Exactly. That's right. And that's perfect. That he developed a term and he coined it himself. It's called neuroception. And that's a fancy way for saying that we're scanning and we're perceiving outside of our awareness. We're not thinking about it, but we're perceiving all the time safety and danger. And so the best example, so let's just talk about safety, for example, and that's where you had started, Patty, was that when we're in the green zone, when we're not even necessarily aware of it, we're not consciously saying, I feel safe. But when you see a child playing and they're really spontaneously playing and their smile takes up their whole face and their eyes are smiling and they're cuddling, he talks about something called immobilization without fear. And that is a sign of real safety. It's like when two lovers are holding one another and your body is really still, but there's no fear. That's gold. And that's a sign that you're in the green zone, totally. So that's what all this is leading to is we want to maximize our green zone. And what that is called is the ventral vagal system. It's the 10th cranial nerve. And Patty, do you want to tell us a little bit about the 10th cranial nerve?
Sure. So basically, there's two parts of this nerve, two branches. And one is called the ventral vagal, and it's a myelinated nerve system. And what that means is it's faster. So, and it's more modern. It's a later developed system. And basically it controls your cranial muscles. So if you are making facial expressions, if you are humming or singing, it also controls your throat and your vocal cords. So when you're doing those things, you're actually stimulating the ventral vagal.
That's great. And that's the green part. That's what we want to be doing. And so when, let's just say, for example, we're sitting there and a stranger comes in, it's a little bit easier to talk about it from a child's perspective, but this is equally true, let's say at a party or just socially, that someone comes in. The first thing that we do is we assess them socially. So we look, our ears perk up, and maybe we engage them either with our eyes, like we make eye contact, and we're scanning to see, is it friend or foe?
Right.
And if that goes well, then they signal to us, non-verbally usually, maybe verbally, they smile, their eyes give us something, all's good, we stay in the green zone. But let's say we pick up something a little creepy, or they snarl, as you said earlier, Anne, or just that they're flat, their face. Actually, what's interesting is immobilization of the face means that they're armored, that they aren't in the green zone. And guess what happens? If they're not in the green zone, what's that going to do to my green zone?
It's probably going to stimulate you and make you feel threatened.
That's right.
But it's unconscious. You don't even know you're responding.
Exactly. One of the things about neuroception is it's outside of our awareness. We don't even know it. So the next stage, so remember we talked about three systems. The first system is safety and the green zone. There's two red zones. So the first red zone is that if that doesn't work and I check out the person and they don't give me a good vibe, then I'm going to get activated. And that's kind of what you were talking about, Anne, about the fight flight. Like maybe I will give them a mean look back or
leave the party.
Exactly, or leave the party. Or let's say it's me and my partner and he or she is rude when they come in and I'm like, hey, what's up? And then they're still rude. Then I either am going to aggress back, or maybe I'll withdraw, right? Now I'm activated and I'm in fight, flight mode.
And so much of that, Sue, is just a reminder, is instinctual, right? And it's not our conscious process. And I think that's so hard because it feels conscious. If your partner snaps at you and you snap back, how often do you go, but you snapped at me first?
Right.
And it's sort of irrelevant, but what it is your body are both matching each other in this feeling of feeling danger. Like you look at me and what you're talking about, Patty, now that your eyes are squinting and those things in your face that are saying, I'm upset, I'm angry, and you're communicating a sense of danger to me, then my body's prepped and it's instinctual. It's a part of us that are just nature calling us to, and remember, it's to prepare us to protect us.
And Ann, that's really valuable. And part of what I hope we can just talk about a little bit is how you can recognize those things and do things to change, to sort of recruit your body to change your state.
I totally want to get to that for sure. Because we want to learn how to go from the red zone back to the green zone.
Absolutely.
Even before we get into that, Sue, take us into the part about trying to understand the other red zone, because I think that's the meat of what we really want to understand before we get
very excited about that, aren't you?
I want to get into the how-tos.
So, and just one other quick example of this red zone, and then I promise I'll get to the other one. But like that, the activated red zone is what we're talking about. Just for those of you who are kind of following on a little more depth, is that's a sympathetic system where you're activated, you're going to move, you're going to get into safety in a more, you're going to fight the saber-toothed tiger, or you're going to be able to run from the saber-toothed tiger. And, but you're armored now. Now you have your spear in your hand. And so that's kind of like, let's go back to the fight with the partner. And sometimes that sounds like, well, I said, I'm sorry. What else do you want? But you can hear that there's not the open-hearted, and a lot of times you don't know that you're armored and you think you've checked off the box. What else do they want from you? So I don't know if you all can relate to that, but then what you're putting out is red, but you're not aware of it. And then guess what you're going to get back is probably not green.
Lots more red.
Exactly. Yeah. But I said, I'm sorry, Patty. Like, what's the problem?
That's not an apology.
You're relentless. So I don't know, listeners, if you can relate to any of this. But if you can begin, part of the idea is if we can begin to read our bodies and sort of outsmart the polyvagal system, right? Okay, so Ann, we've got the red zone, the green zone of the safety, the red zone of activation in the sympathetic system of fight flight. And then the third one Ann is pointing out is the dorsal vagal system, which is the other part of the nerve. And that is where we drop down. And that is when there's the neuroperception. Well, actually, I guess that's true. But there's the perception, it's usually non-conscious. There's a perception, even sometimes of life threat. Somebody else might not see that, but there's something that feels to the body, to the unconscious, very, very dangerous. So that's the mouse that kind of passes out in the cat's mouth, and the cat kind of loses interest and puts the mouth down and starts licking its paws, and the mouse gets to get away. It often happens in sexual abuse, in severe trauma.
Yeah, and PTSD, if a veteran hears a horn go off and they feel like it's a siren, and they're all of a sudden back in a war zone ready to face combat. And it doesn't matter that was a car horn. It still feels like a life and death threat.
That's exactly right. And so that's the dropping all the way down. And that goes back to the parasympathetic. And the parasympathetic is what controls that high activation. So, so earlier when I talked about me turtling up, that's some of that has to do with like just dropping all the way down. It's a way of finding safety when there's a perception of real danger. And sometimes there really is that danger. The saber-toothed tiger actually has you, and the thing is bigger than you, and there's really no way out. Or sometimes there's just a perception of that. Or maybe you have used that defense at some point in your life, and so it's kind of already
habituated.
It's grooved so that when you get particularly frightened, you just kind of go there.
And I like what you're saying, how you're saying it. It's an intense threat that hits us. And so what makes us go to a fight or flight in that one red zone versus when we feel danger versus the intense threat where we actually drop that down into a more parasympathetic effect, like the mouse or a possum's a great example.
Yeah, possum is a great example.
Dead. They're not actually playing. Their whole body just went dead.
That's right.
And their system shuts down. Their heart goes lower. Their digestive tract slows down. So you have an actual physiological response, and it's not conscious, you didn't choose it, but it's because not only do you feel a great deal of threat, you feel trapped, or you are trapped, or you have the perception that you can't get out. And so your body, if you think about it, is doing it to protect yourself, because if you can't run, and we can't outrun a saber-toothed tiger, and we know it, you can't outrun. So your body's going to drop down, and it's actually, for many, it can be functional in a sense of deep threat where you're trapped. And Patty, you talk a little bit about that, talking about the functional elements of what happens when you drop down that low. What does it provide for us in our survival?
Sure. If you are the mouse, what it provides for you is that in some cases, the predator will go away and you'll survive. If the predator sticks around, it raises your pain tolerance so that if you actually are killed or injured, you won't feel it as much as you would if you weren't in the dorsal vagal system.
That's right. It's a defense of last resort.
Defense of last resort, or protective. And you mentioned, if we bring it to a human level, you mentioned PTSD or sexual abuse, and to kind of touch on that, because they're really sensitive. If something's happening to you as a child or even as an adult, and it isn't overwhelming your system and you're trapped, the idea of being able to distance and dissociate and
it's life-saving.
It's like you're not as aware in your body, and you leave your body. It protects you in pain, and it helps you dissociate. You even don't have as much of a memory in some ways of it because you have distance. So it's a really protective at the time of threat. And what you mentioned, Patty, when we talk about habituated, is that we can habituate to it, and then it's not as functional when a bell goes off or your partner's there and your partner's really not threatening to you, but your body is responding in a real traumatic way.
Right. And then the other half of that, though, is like you say that, in the world now, or like not in war or not in an abusive situation, if somebody's turtling up on you, then it's very dysregulating for the other person, because what the other person needs is again, the green zone.
Social engagement. They want eye contact. They want to hear a soft voice. And if you've dropped into that dorsal
vagal,
you are unavailable, and that is frightening to the other person, but frightening in the sense of stimulating. And so they try harder, and as they try harder, you turtle more.
Tapping on the shell.
That's right.
Throwing it against the wall.
And so it's sort of a feedback loop that couples often get caught in, where, and this is really true with parents of autistic kids who can't make eye contact, who have a flat affect, and that stimulates the parents to keep trying harder and harder to try to make eye contact, to try and, reach their children. And in essence, that harder and harder is really counterproductive.
It's counterproductive, but I really love getting that other half in, because it also sort of helps us have compassion for how much we need social engagement, just from the most fundamental level, that we're social animals, we're social creatures. And to lose that, even for a moment, is very threatening and very stimulating.
Or it feels very threatening.
Well, I think it is. I think it is, because when you think of the very early studies of infants, like Stern and things like that, when mother just even goes flat face, the infant gets very dysregulated. So I think of it as a kind of fundamental need. So as we're talking about this, so we're beginning to think about, if you go low, that the goal is to get, to look up, to re-engage, to at least speak, to peak. Like sometimes I run in different groups, and the way that I think about it is like, any moving from isolation and withdrawal to any kind of contact, and I call it peaking, speaking, take your time, but basically it's like almost seducing someone out of it in a very slow, but yes, I'm interested, take your time, we'll come back to you. That's the kind of feel of it. And then when it's high and it's activated, it's more of containment, right?
And talking quietly.
Yep.
And also you were talking earlier before we were on the podcast about when you had a baby and the child was crying a lot, that you would hum. And so I thought that was a great example, because your vocal cords are actually innervated by your smart vagus and your social engagement system. When you sang to your child, you were actually stimulating the vagus nerve and you were calming yourself down because all his crying had made you agitated. But you were also, by singing, making him calmer, because when we listen, we actually have to use some of the muscles that are also innervated by the vagus nerve. And so the social engagement system is pulled back online and we're moved into that green zone. So both mother and child are both moved into the green zone.
Yeah, it's such a great example of just the natural, like I didn't know any of that, right? But I would get so upset, and I didn't know anything else to do, but somebody had said lullabies, right? So now you're right. Like now I understand what that is or was, and thank heavens, but for millennials, that people naturally did that and just kind of chanting and humming and singing and lullabies as a way of regulating oneself. So I totally agree. And
let's take a break for just a second, because I love talking with you guys. We are doing this podcast out of labors of love. And it's a wonderful love because you can tell that we love this topic and we love our listeners who are interested in this topic. But we have such appreciation and gratitude for a sponsor, and we want to tell you about it, that's helping us produce this.
Yeah, we have a new sponsor, and it's Theranest. And Theranest provides practice management software for therapists. And so those of our listeners who are therapists, this might be of interest to you. You can contact them by going to our website, and there is an ad on our website that will have a special offer just for our listeners that they put together. And you can click that and it'll take you to the website and it'll explain all about the special offer.
And, for those of us that don't really love the business aspect of our profession, we feel gratitude for those kind of services.
That's right.
So to jump back for a second is why we're talking about, when you were saying the different ways that we want to help our listeners and ourselves recognize that these different systems, because it's really hard not to get mad at your partner, because it seems so like if you just say, would you just give me eye contact, look up? And when you're upset and you're trying to talk to them and they're turtled up and they're avoiding eye contact and not looking at you, it's really hard to feel it unjust, unfair, and then not to even realize that you're getting activated and stimulating and you're coming further and more intense, like we were speaking about it. And so it's not like this insight all of a sudden means that when your partner starts looking down and turtling up, or you're the turtle and they start banging you and saying, stop it, that you're going to have all this awareness and insight, because we had to go back to that. This is really automatic and this is really deep inside of us. So it'd be nice for us to talk about some strategies of how to get out of it when you see your partner activated and you're activated at the same time, because that's probably the more common dynamic, right? Because the turtling up is really, really hard, or the person that's raising their voice and gnarling their teeth, it's really hard not to feel our own activation.
That's right. Porges talks about the face heart and as a system, and particularly the upper half of the face. And so that's one of the things to sort of emphasize is like, this is a physiologically driven, it's in our body. Like you said, it's not in our awareness. It's not conscious. Nobody's doing this on purpose. But the whole point of this is to help us become more conscious of it and to give strategies. And what we're going to do, just for time so that we don't go on and on and on, is we're going to wrap this up pretty quickly. And then we're going to do a part 2 that's going to be nothing but talking about strategies when you're in the red zone, how to get back to the green.
Or how to help someone else get back to the green.
That's right. But I just last thought is that in order to feel compassion for another person, there's no way to feel compassion if we're armed. And so the face heart, and like if we want to think of it as a portal, and so it's almost like, this is language. This is Porges' language, is that because one of the things about the nerve is that 80% of the information goes from the body to the brain, and 20% of it is muscular. So literally, this is just a hint of what's to come, that if we begin to consciously do things like make eye contact, soften our voice, breathe.
In some situations, just, rub our arms, rub our shoulders,
particularly our neck. There's because the nerve goes down the neck. So we'll talk in more detail about that and cover that. But the notion is that we're trying to give the body from the gut and from all of these systems that it's running up to the brain signals of safety. And that's also going to come with our thoughts. And this is what this is about, is the more that you can understand what's happening and that don't let the body be in charge, that we're going to begin to be able to master and out these old brain systems. They're very ancient.
Right. And I think
reptilian.
And one of the things for our listeners to keep in mind is you're not doing something bad and you probably can't change it overnight, but patience and compassion for yourself and your partner or yourself and your child will help you master these systems.
That's right. So thanks for listening. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do at your favorite podcast platform. And if you've already a subscriber, then please rate and review us. Give us an honest rating and review. We would really appreciate that.
On our website is www.therapistsuncensored.com.
And if you haven't yet, and if you are on our email list, we're going to be sending out, this is from a previous podcast, Dan Siegel offered very graciously a PDF of his founding article about interpersonal neurobiology. So we will probably, by the time this is out, we would have sent it out to our current subscribers. So if you would like a copy of that, then get on our email list and we will shoot you a copy.
Thanks for listening.
See you around the bend.
Therapists Uncensored is Ann Kelly, Patty Alwell, and Sue Marriott. Cameron Lindsay edits the show.